Priyanka is here, and they founded this consultancy a few years ago. You will have read other aspects of biodata, but I find out that she has a background in political science from several different places. She spent time in Turkey, she spent time in Egypt, she spent time in North Africa, yes, looking at water-related issues, and then now working out of Bombay, on transboundary water issues. This time, I suppose they're much broader than just India and China, but of course India and China is a very important part of our transboundary issues. So this is really a very important topic. I'm here only to be instructed in thought, not to preach. I know so little, I'm well aware of my ignorance, because this is the politics of the future. Water scarcity and I suppose water surplus. And it's the politics, the eco-politics of our everyday lives in the era of climate change. So with those few words, let us ask her to go ahead, and you have a very important audience here. All age groups, and no need for unnecessary modesty. I think other people may be getting that as well, not only me. So thank you very much for being here, and we're greatly looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you to the ICS for having me, and to all of you for being here. I am, as Patricia mentioned, a political scientist by training. I'm not, at the outset, I always like to tell people that I'm not an engineer, a water engineer, though I've been doing this now for almost 15 years. So I feel like somebody should give me a degree in water engineering. I've studied many basins around the world. I've traveled up and down the Nile, in the Senegal Basin in West Africa, in Southern Africa, in South Africa, in Southeast Asia along the Mekong, and also in Europe along the Rhine and the Danube. I haven't traveled, unfortunately, hopefully one day, to Central Asia, though I have studied the river basins over there. And one of the key aspects of what I've been doing and what Uber 9 does now is to sort of try and bridge the gap between what the engineering and the scientific community researches, learns, understands and informs us, and then the policy community, which ultimately makes all your policy decisions. And sometimes you find that there's a big gap between the two, because the scientific community usually speaks a certain language that our policy community doesn't always understand, and vice versa. So one of the things I tell people that I do is to be that bridge builder. So the important part of that then is to ensure you understand what both parties are saying, and that's kind of the basis of what I wanted to talk about over here, is to how we can understand that language from both the Indian perspective and the Chinese perspective. Even though I'm talking a little bit about transboundary water in the northeast of India, so the Brahmaputra, the Ganga and the Meghna Basin, I'm concentrating mostly on an Indian and Chinese perspective, because for whether we like it or not, the perspectives out of these two countries is what's going to inform and then decide how we deal with the future of the river basin over here. It would be really amazing if Bangladesh, Nepal and Bhutan could take forward an initiative, but frankly, coming down to it, without India and China, nothing will happen. So if at any point I veer into language that sort of makes me sound a little bit like an engineer or a scientist, and it's not clear what I'm saying, please feel free to stop me in the middle. Or if you have any question, I'm gonna say that Rajesh, I hope it's okay if we just it's more like a conversation. So at any point, if somebody has a question or wants to stop me and has a point to bring forth, I'm happy to do that. I mean, my presentation mostly has like a lot of maps on it, which I sometimes find is helpful to sort of put things in perspective, because for somebody who doesn't always know how these rivers are connected, then we think of it as something that's over in some part of the country or some part of the world, but then we don't really know what is the interconnectedness of it. So this is the Ganga, Brahmaputra and Meghna Basin. The Brahmaputra, as you might know, comes from China. It's called the Yarlung Tsangpo up in China. We have the Ganga, that's largely in India. You have headwaters that are coming from China and from Nepal. And then you have the Meghna River, which then joins with the Brahmaputra and the Ganga in Bangladesh, that flows into the Bay of Bengal. I mean, it's just a quick snapshot. I'm going to assume that everybody has already seen this map or a similar map. What is interesting about this basin is that it's home to 10%, a little over 10%, and depending on what studies you look at, 10 to 12% of the world's population. So that's a little over 800 million people, which is a lot of people that is dependent on this very interconnected basin. The basin is spread over 1.75 million kilometers square. So that's really large. And if you think about it, we have China, India, Bangladesh, Nepal and Bhutan. And this whole basin, if we think of it as three separate rivers, then it's always going to remain as three separate rivers. You have the Brahmaputra and its tributaries, you have the Ganga and her tributaries, and then the Meghna Basin or the Padma and her tributaries, right? But the important thing here, and the one thing I like to stress all the time, is that these are not three separate rivers. These are three very, very interconnected rivers, which then makes the 5 countries that are a part of this river basin extremely interconnected, which then makes them very, very important. If we look at, and just a quick snapshot of these rivers, they are very, very different rivers if you study them in isolation. The water quality in these rivers, the type of sedimentation that they have, the physiological units of these rivers, they're all very different. But they all come together, and in Bangladesh they discharge 138,000 cubic meters of water per second in a monsoon period. Now, that number seems like it doesn't make any sense for somebody who might not understand that, but to put it in context, the amount of water the Amazon discharges is a little over 200,000 cubic meters per second in a monsoon period. So not very far behind from how much the Amazon River, which is the largest in the world, discharges. So again, coming back to how important the entire river basin is. Yes.
The same thing as in Bangladesh?
No, the Ganga is called the Padma in Bangladesh. The Meghna is a separate river, but if you see the Meghna and the Padma, they join together along with the tributaries of the
Padma is the name of Ganga.
In Bangladesh, yes. But it's the same river. And this is really why sometimes we have questions also, is because rivers then take on different names in different countries, and then we think of them as separate units. But a map like this shows us how derivative it is to think of it as separate units, right? It's extremely interconnected. Now these rivers are, and this is something I don't have to tell anybody over here, they are extremely important. They are lifelines for the 800 million people that live along this river basin. It's important to China, it's important to Nepal, to Bhutan, to India, to Bangladesh. It's important not only for the livelihoods of these people, but for food security, energy security. It's also important because it really informs the health of the population that lives along this river. And that's not something, again, we automatically think of. We don't connect health security of a population with a river. We think of water as supply, water for industry, water for agriculture, then water for food security and energy security. But health security becomes a very important aspect of how we should be thinking of our water, whether it is within the country or outside the country. The other aspect to keep in mind is that water is also about future, and it's about maintaining an ecological and environmental balance. So we cannot only think of water in terms of supply, which is how we generally tend to or have, and when I say we, I mean as a population as a whole around the world, we think of water as how much water we can supply to ourselves or to somebody, and how much water we can then use for the three parts of our lives, right? Domestic use, agricultural use, and industrial use. But water is about maintaining an ecological balance of a river or a water body and allowing that water to continue to flow so your river remains till tomorrow and the day after and for your future generations. We cannot use up that entire water now or at any point in time. So the problems then that are faced by this river basin, which I have some very nice and also disturbing, not so nice pictures. I mean, flooding, we've seen this, it happens every year in Assam, it happens every year in Bangladesh, it happens in China, it happens in other parts of India along our other river basins. Then drought as well. And as Patricia is saying, it's a problem of too much and it's a problem of too little. More often than not, a lot of these issues that we hear about every day and we talk about every day are exacerbated by man-made problems. So what does that mean? When you look at flooding, and if we talk about Assam, for example, which is then something similar that happens in Bangladesh, is that when we don't allow natural flooding to take its course, it affects the human population that lives along a river, along a water body, which could be a river or a lake or anything else. So that's then aggravated by development along natural floodplains, marshlands. Then you have settlements that are allowed to grow very close to river banks, and then it's the settlements that face the problems when you have excessive rain or excessive flooding. Dam building activities. This also hurts our river bodies. This happens every year in India. We've seen what happened in Kerala last year. I mean, I live in Bombay, and every year we have this great monsoon that comes for 2-3 months. Every year the city is flooded, right? So, and it's not that you'd imagine that right next to the sea, there's space for water to go, but all of Bombay's marshlands, for example, natural marshlands, have all been developed. So the water then gets stagnated. So it's little things like this that aggravate your natural disasters by human growth and development. Now, this is not to say that one can't have human growth and development, but how we do it becomes then very important. In 2016, the UN commissioned a study with a number of different organizations around the world, including some in India, and they found that the GBM, which is the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna Basin, was the world's most vulnerable basin on several different indicators. They had 15 of them. These 5 we ranked the highest, and in this sense, ranking the highest was not a good thing at all. We did not want to rank the highest on the worst water in terms of quantity, quality, governance along this basin, socio-economic vulnerability, or ecological impact.
What do you mean by quantity?
So I can explain. So quantity here means how much water we use versus how much water we let flow. So that's how we measure. So good So when you say a river has good quantity, it doesn't mean it always has a lot of water, because some rivers are seasonal, which means they only have water during monsoon, or some rivers are perennial, they have water all year round, right? But quantity is if the river has, say, 100 cubic meters of water, and we use, depending on needs and requirements, say 40 of it, and then let 60 of it flow. So if you have maintained your ecological balance, that means your water quantity is good. If you have not maintained your ecological balance, or your water quality is bad, or your governance along that river is bad, then you rank very low on indicators.
Stress is what you mean.
It's how we use it. It's management.
Stress.
It's management more than stress.
I see.
If you have, and this is something I'll come to as I go along, but we rank really low on all of these indicators. We rank even lower than river basins in the Middle East and in Africa, where there is a certain assumption that given that their crisis situation and political situation over there, the governance of their rivers is poor. But unfortunately, the governance of our rivers is far lower than it is in some of these conflict zones. So you have all of this, and then, as Patricia said, we have climate change, right? Climate change then makes it really harder to predict what's going to happen, and then to further manage all of our basins going forward. If you already have bad governance, if you have socio-economic vulnerability, then climate change makes it even harder to work with populations that are termed at climate risk. So all of this is happening in our GBM basin, and all of this then makes it that much difficult and that much harder to work together, both within a country and then across countries. I have a very, this is a quote from the retired chief engineer of the Brahmaputra board. He says, we can't help the rain, but we can certainly control the damage caused by floods. And if this is, he's now retired, but if he had been taken a lot more seriously, this is a quote from a few years ago, it would have really benefited, and he came up with a number of different plans that could have mitigated the extent of damage and crisis that's caused by flooding in Assam. He looked at Assam more specifically, but some of the ideas and plans that he came up with could be implemented in many parts of this region. So I'm just going to leave that up here for everyone to ponder a little bit. But coming back then to what you said, floods, drought, okay, so this is all there. But what is then the underlying problem? And it comes down to mismanagement and the lack of transboundary agreements in this basin. Because if we think of the first map that I showed everyone, the basin is, all these three rivers are incredibly interconnected, which means you have to have more dialogue and better coordination across the countries to be able to manage your basin together. It cannot be done in isolation, which has really been the case for all these years and decades. So, yes.
This one, so considering the previous slide about the damage caused by floods,
Yeah.
and what you said previously about natural flooding, so how exactly would you allow natural flooding to happen and run its course, considering also the damage caused by it? Because you mentioned the example of, say, Bombay,
Yeah.
and that you know definitely that there's a lot of development there, but say, how would that work in Assam? Like, how would you let natural flooding just run its course?
So the Brahmaputra river in Assam has natural floodplains. These floodplains serve as catchment areas for water, and these floodplains have been in existence since the Brahmaputra was in existence. So, you can put a date to that. There's several dates that we can put to that, but ever since the river has been there. Now if you look at the Brahmaputra, of the development of the river, let's just say, take Assam for example, though if you look at the larger basin, Assam is probably the least developed, but some of the biggest settlement areas are along this river, and you don't have these natural floodplains anymore. So you have a river, you have a natural floodplain, then you should have settlements, right? If you have built all the way up to the river has no place to go when it's in spate, right? So, and you can't, and like Dr. Barbohen said, you can't help the rain, but you can help where you've built, is where it comes down to.
I think other comments we can take at the end.
Okay.
We'll see where she's going.
So this is a map of China, which, no, I'm sure what I should have done really is come here and then take a map of China, because I just took from the internet. But it sort of serves to show us some of the rivers that China has. China has over 40 major water courses, and that's a mix of rivers, streams, lakes, that it shares with her neighbors. Of which 16 are rivers. So there's 40 major water courses, and 16 of them are rivers. I mean, this is the Yarlung Tsangpo, which becomes the Brahmaputra in India. Then there's the Mekong, there's the Salween, the Ob, the Amur, there's the Irtish. So there's many rivers there. These rivers, major water rivers across China, collectively feed 3 billion people in the world. So that's almost half the world's population are dependent on rivers that China shares with her neighbors. So it's very, very important to understand then the Chinese perspective on how they deal with their shared water courses. Going back a little bit, and Rajesh and I were talking about this earlier. So in 2011, when China came up with its 12th five-year plan, and they do these plans every 5 or 6 years, they realized that 28,000 of their waterways in the country were either dead or unusable, and 11 out of the 33 subnational administrative units suffer from high to extreme water stress. This was back in 2010 when they had done the study, before they came out with the 12th five-year plan. So the 12th five-year plan that came out in March 2011, the government described, and this is from their plan, that the abysmal state of water quality in the country and decreasing availability was the greatest impediment to their development plans. And China has very ambitious development plans. Now these development plans are not just development in terms of developing a town or a city, but also to ensure food security for its population and energy security and health security. Which is why they realized that 28,000 waterways were unusable, most of them in the central and northern regions of China, which were high population zones. It's going to affect the health security of this country. China has also got the fastest growing hydropower infrastructure in the world. So unusable waterways affects your energy security, and then of course food security. So this is what China discovered. They put it into motion with the 12th five-year plan, and then came up with a number of policies to deal with this and to rectify this. Some of these policies were really, really good, which I'm currently still studying some of their policies, and we're actually working with ICS to come out with a paper on some of the more effective policies that China put into place over the last decade and what we can learn from China, given that we have now created our own ministry of newer, more streamlined ministry of water, and there are some new policies of our own. So why not learn from our neighbor that faces some of the similar problems that we face? So China had this problem, then it's like, okay, we've got these policies now, and then they've got all this shared water. So what becomes exciting then is to consider how China deals with its neighbors when it comes to its shared waterways. So China deals with its neighbors very differently, and that's kind of very unique to China, because China is very unique in many ways. This is not a place I need to stress on that, but it's a little bit skewed as to how they deal with their waterways. So in the north, for example, with Russia, Kazakhstan, North Korea, Mongolia, China deals with their water in a much more positive manner. They are not viewed as a hydro-hegemon. They are not. They don't have that we are more powerful kind of stance. As opposed to when you look at the way China currently deals with and has dealt with some of their southern neighbors. So with India, with the Mekong countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And this difference in how they do the work that they do sort of gives us a little bit more of an insight into China's thinking when it comes to their neighborhood policy. If we combine this with the fact that China in their 12th five-year plan said that they have all these development needs, you then realize, you see the parallels that are being drawn. So for example, if you look at China's relationship with Kazakhstan, it is one of the only countries that has managed to create a proper treaty and agreement over a shared water, China and Kazakhstan, on the Indus River. Because to put it very simply, Kazakhstan had a lot of copper that China needed. So it was kind of a no-brainer in terms of what China required and what Kazakhstan managed to get out of them. Kazakhstan also lobbied Russia to get that relationship going. The other kind of interesting example is if we look at how China has dealt with the lower Mekong countries. Now, there was a lower Mekong river agreement between the four countries that share this river. For many years, that China refused to be a part of. They said, we've got all the headwaters. You can feel free to have an agreement on your own. We're not going to be a part of it. But then, increasingly so, Yunnan province, which is in southwest China, was one of the poorest provinces in the country, and they had great development plans for the Yunnan province, which then depended on the Mekong River. So they, over the last decade or so, there has been greater cooperation with these Mekong countries because it becomes then a water exchange program where navigation and then transport, communication, all of that came into play to develop the Yunnan province. So then China agreed to have a greater cooperation mechanism with the lower Mekong countries. So it comes back to China's thought process on all of this is what are our development requirements, what are our needs for the future, and if we need to have an agreement with a country or two or three countries, then we'll do this. Unfortunately, this has not had happened with the Brahmaputra river and with the Ganga, with any of the neighbors that share this river, because these lower riparian countries, so Nepal, Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, haven't managed to create that sort of an agreement with China. But looking at it from a Chinese perspective. Now there is a 1997 I was supposed to show you this map, but this is the map of the lower Mekong river, and up there is the Yunnan province, which is very important for China. So the 1997 UN Water Courses Convention, which informs water policy, law and international agreements, has not been signed by China. It's not been signed by India either, except for 4 countries around the world. All of the others have signed it. So China doesn't have to abide by any water law or agreement. They have chosen to when it suits their purpose. India has not, other than the Indus Water Treaty, abided by any international water law either. And then you see sort of some of the similarities between India and China on how it behaves when it comes to the shared water resources. There's one other thing that's really what drives policy from China is that they've got this need to present a kind of positive international image. We see this in many places, but you definitely see it when it comes to how they discuss their shared waters. I cannot comment on all of the areas in which China works, but I can tell you that when it comes to a discussion on water, they do like to pretend or behave like they are going to work with you. And more often than not they do, because it then creates a sort of better image that they have within the region and around the world. So while one argues that pursuing its own interests is how China creates policy. When it comes to this area of water security, it does behave in a much more positive manner, and it does consider cooperation as important to their overall needs. So that's how China operates. There's a quote I have here from President Xi in 2013, and this was after their 12th five-year plan came out. And I mean, granted this is from 2013, but when it comes to some of their shared waters, they do follow this quite closely with several countries and several neighbors that they share water bodies with. And the fact that we need to work vigorously to create more cooperation opportunities and contribute to, and I mean, I'm not going to say global growth, I'm going to say regional growth over here, is how it's developed over the last few years, especially if you look at Southeast China and even in the northwest along Kazakhstan, Mongolia and the Russian region over there. So that's how China is thinking when it comes to the Ganga, its entire water, shared waters, which then lets us understand a little bit of the insight as to how they will think when it comes to the water basins that they share with India, which is the Brahmaputra, Ganga, where also you have Nepal, Bhutan and Bangladesh as part of this basin. So where does India then feature in this whole conversation, and what is India's perspective? So India in many ways is not very different from China when it comes to our shared waters. India is kind of unusual because to China we are a downstream country, so the water flows from China into India, from Nepal and from Bhutan into India. And then when it comes to Bangladesh, we become an upstream country. And I'm not going to touch on what's happening on the Western Front because that's a very complicated region. Water politics, security, with Pakistan play a different role. So I'm just concentrating on the eastern side over here. So we're very unique in that sense. We are both an upstream and a downstream country. There's very few countries around the world that are in this unique position, and some of them have managed to use that to their advantage. Some of them have managed to bring together their upstream and downstream neighbors to work together. So we find ourselves in a very small club in that sense. The conditions in India are a little bit different. So if you remember, China informs a lot of its shared water security agreements based on their development needs and what was written in their 12th five-year plan, which is a very important plan if we look at the last 20-30 years of China when it comes to this subject. In India, water is a state subject. It's not actually a center subject. So state politics, state emotions, all of this tends to sometimes inform our national water policies, and they also then create obstacles and impediments. I mean, the most obvious example here is the Teesta agreement that we still have not signed with Bangladesh because of West Bengal. There is now hope that this will also get done in the near future, but there was a lot of hope in 2011. I was one of the many people who worked on the Teesta agreement in the background. We worked for years to put together the best agreement that would help India and Bangladesh, and I personally, I don't think we could have done a better job, but then, and we were all very excited and hopeful in 2011, but that never happened. Then there was some hope again in 2015 when Prime Minister Modi came into power the first time that this would get done. It didn't get done. Earlier this year, there's been some sort of, I think the Bangladeshis are really hopeful again. and I continue to remain hopeful. We'll see how if that hopes. I'm very optimistic. Let's say that this might actually work. But this then comes down to tell us how states, because water is a very emotive subject in India, and it's a state subject. It does play a big role in as to how we think and then inform our policy when it comes to our shared waters, and in this region especially. Water has also been till very recently in India a very secretive subject. There is hardly any data that you will find, updated current data on water quantity, water quality when it comes to our shared waters. This is now, thankfully it's changing. There's a lot more research is happening, a lot more information is available on this subject. So then it allows the academic and the scientific community to be more updated and then to create information and analysis that can then help both state governments and your central government. What is kind of interesting is if you see many other middle riparians, which India is in this basin, a middle riparian. So you've got water coming from upstream, water going downstream. So we're a middle riparian. Many others around the world also have guarded water as a very secret subject. So one doesn't know why that's so, but many middle riparians work in the same way, which is kind of an interesting parallel if you look around the world. So this is what's happening in India. We haven't signed too many agreements with our neighbors in this region on our shared waters. We have the 1996 agreement on the Ganga water agreement with Bangladesh. We have some MOUs with Nepal and Bhutan. We do have an MOU with China on data, where they provide us data, which had stopped during the Dokam time, but now it's renewed and everything is back on track. But there is no basin-wide mechanism. And given that India is a middle riparian, it's in a very unique position to sort of take this conversation forward. We, along with China, have very ambitious development plans. China has the South-North Water Diversion Project, which is all over the country, but some part of that project will divert water from the Yarlung Tsangpo before it becomes the Brahmaputra in India. And we get very excited about that. The media always gets excited. Sometimes it's a very negative image that's portrayed about this subject without a real understanding of the realities. Now diversion, and I don't want to get too much into the science of it, but diversion during monsoon time and non-monsoon periods is very different. China still hasn't, sort of given I don't know if they have themselves all the plans of what they're planning to do, but certainly what they've showed us is not going to affect the flow as much as we'd like to think it is. So before we get excited about it, it's always better to do a little bit more research and analysis. On India's side, we have our own diversion plans, the national proposed inter-basin water transfer links, which is very ambitious. As you can see, all over the country, we are going to be linking rivers and diverting water and doing all sorts of things. Now, this is given the rate at which India does things, it's probably like a 50-year plan, so it's all right. We don't have to be worried right now, but we have started. MP has started. The UP has already started some of the work on these projects. Some part of this plan is looking to divert water from the Brahmaputra before it flows into Bangladesh. So then it comes down to the question that, and this is a little bit tricky, but India gets very excited about what China is going to do. But if we were to compare some of these plans, we're doing to Bangladesh a little bit similar as to what might happen to us if and when all of everybody's plans get realized, which will take a long time. So I always like to talk about a little bit of caution when it comes to discussing and talking about these plans, because A, none of it's happening right now, and B, these kind of plans, even when you build a dam, for example, on a river, it never ends up being what you want it to be. It's always a little bit different. So, so a little bit of caution, a little bit of pause is not is warranted in some cases. But water is a very emotive subject in India, so we have to be a bit difficult, what do you say, a bit cautious when it comes to this discussion. What we are planning to do is a prior use right, and this is really how India thinks when it comes to the waters on this basin, right? And this is a legal definition. I mean, the legal definition is very long, but this is a shortened version of that legal definition. What does this mean? This really means that if you use water for a beneficial purpose, right, that is for domestic, agriculture within a certain boundary, or industrial, again within a certain boundary, and these boundaries are defined by international water law, then the water is yours because you used it first. Which, if you're a downstream country, doesn't always make sense, because you're going by the assumption that your upstream neighbor will abide by that law as well. And when you have two countries like India and China that are not signatories to any of these laws and agreements, then you don't have to abide by it. We are going by the assumption that if we have a prior use right on the Brahmaputra that's coming from China, then they will abide by this. They might not. But to build and to develop and to plan based on this is not very smart in the long term, in the future. So we have to think a little bit differently, and this is where then India really needs to change its mindset about how we want to go forward. We have to think a little bit differently. We have to understand why China does what it does when it comes to its shared waters. What is the perspective, what is the reasoning that they put in around their country with all of their neighbors, and how can we use that to our advantage? Whom can we work with on this? Bangladesh is an excellent neighbor in that sense. We can find common cause with Bangladesh. They have ever been ready to work with us on building a more trans-boundary, basin-wide mechanism. We have always been partial towards bilateral and now trilateral agreements. Similarly to China, we don't want large basin-wide mechanisms because they can be unwieldy and tricky. But if we look at some parts of the world, there are very good examples of how basin-wide mechanisms can work, even if you are in a zone or a region that faces conflict and is or has tense neighbors. I like to always use the example of Senegal, the Senegal River Basin, which is in West Africa. There are 4 countries that share the Senegal River Basin, and they have very limited cooperation on most areas, but they have one of the best basin-wide mechanisms and the Senegal River Basin Organization to deal with their shared waters. They, in fact, and this is something that for people who don't realize it surprises them, is they have jointly built dams. They jointly manage the dams, and joint management also includes joint funding, everything, management, everything. And so the dams then don't become a contentious issue. And dams always become a contentious issue when one country is building it and stopping the process. Here the dams are jointly built, jointly managed, and all come under their basin-wide mechanism. The other examples are if we look at the Danube and the Rhine in Europe. But these are very lofty agreements. They had a great mechanism of cooperation already under the European Union. So it was a little bit easier in that sense to create water agreements. But then I come back to Senegal where they had no cooperation on virtually anything back in the 50s when they put together the Senegal River Basin Organization. And I'm always like, if they can do it, why is it that we haven't gotten there quite yet? So I mean, there's lots more I wanted to talk about, but it's almost 4, and I'm hoping there are some questions. But I think it's important. I mean, the only thing I'd like to say is that there is an assumption in India, and I've worked a lot in the East and in along the Nile, that basin-wide cooperation is impossible. And I'm always the first one to say that it's not impossible. It's very, very difficult. I worked on the River Agreement. I worked on an agreement between Israel and Palestine, on the Tigris between Turkey, Syria and Iraq. So it's very difficult, no doubt. But it's not impossible. These things are possible. It just requires, at the end of the day, countries to understand better their neighbors when it comes to this subject. Sometimes the subject of water security is very different from how a country might deal with its neighbor on other issues like economics, trade, or anything else. And India and China deal with a variety of different issues, including our borders, our contentious borders. But sometimes we can divorce this subject from everything else and think about it a little bit innovatively. So I just wanted to leave everybody with that. My recommendation, everyone just listen to me. I think we need to get that TISA agreement signed first. That would really help, because that will bring Bangladesh on board. We can definitely find common cause, like I said, with Bangladesh. It will be difficult for Nepal, Bhutan or Bangladesh to do this on its own. This is the reality. Their economies are much smaller. Their abilities in the region are much smaller. But if we were to work together with Bangladesh and Nepal and Bhutan, just as the 4 lower Mekong countries did, and then in the near future, at some point, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years down the line, you bring China on board. It's an easier way to go about it. Nepal, Bhutan and Bangladesh are not going to resist an agreement like this. We already have in 2014 and in April, we signed the India, Bangladesh, Nepal, we have a sub-regional alliance over managing the Ganga. And then there's one between India, Bangladesh and Bhutan over electricity. These are good areas to begin with. Navigation, yes, in 2013, it's an alliance. So you have alliances, then you have MOUs, then you have agreements, and then finally you have treaties. So this is how the steps go basically. But we have the on electricity, hydroelectricity. The one on water is between India, Nepal and Bangladesh over the Ganga, joint management of the Ganga. And then you have one between India, Bangladesh and Bhutan over electricity production. Right? This was all done in 2013. And these are good places to start to take forward. But I'd say yes, if we can get that TISA agreement signed, that'd be helpful for bringing Bangladesh on board with us.
Technical reason why it couldn't be signed.
We haven't signed up. Registered. Okay, so we're open for discussion. Thank you very much. I think she gave us a very good punchline at the end there, that basin-wide cooperation, which would particularly mean trans-boundaries, but it could be state boundaries, trans-national boundaries, also trans-state boundaries, is difficult but not impossible, and therefore should be taken very seriously before we all begin to salivate about the problems and difficulties. So Thank you very much for a
Thank
very
you.
interesting
I hope that was,
presentation. And
clear.
one which the non-experts of us, I think, can appreciate and understand. So that is excellent. Now, let's go ahead. I'm sure there are lots of questions from the audience and lots of comments. Please.
Yes.
Okay.
No, you have talked about some difficulty in getting the freestyle release.
Yes.
I would be happy if you elaborate a little bit as to what are some of the difficulties and what is the perception of West Bengal, the difference between West Bengal and because you said water states.
Also Meghalaya, I think.
Will you elaborate?
Actually, yes, I was also going to ask that, whether, could you put up the map and explain exactly the dynamics of the the second one?
Yeah, it goes.
Both of them.
No, I think the first map.
It goes.
Yeah, the first
Yeah, that's-
one. Okay, now, so we see the Teesta there.
Yes.
And
So,
what are the,
so here's the Teesta. It's coming from West Bengal.
from
Ganga.
Sikkim, okay.
It's in Sikkim. Then it flows through West Bengal, and then it's into Bangladesh. So one of the main, so water is a state subject, which means that states are allowed to govern their water the way they see fit, depending on development requirements. Now that we have a new ministry, Ministry of Water, Jal Shakti, yes, otherwise it's MOWDDRG. It's very long, but we put it all together. But yes, the Jal Shakti Ministry. There is some thinking that we will, some of the water, the way we deal with water within states will now become a center subject. So you streamline the bureaucracy a little bit. Now how this is going to happen and how the states are going to react to this is something nobody knows. It's just thinking, I know, within some people. So that's, I imagine, a long way off. But because this has been the case till now, in 2011, when the Teesta agreement was, there was a series of meetings led that up to 2011, both by government officials and at the track 2, track 1.5 level. The biggest obstacle to ultimately signing the agreement was West Bengal Chief Minister. The problem that they foresaw for West Bengal was that because of the agreement, the amount of water, and this comes down to then quantity, is that the amount of water that would ultimately be available to Bangladesh would decrease.
To West Bengal.
To West Bengal, sorry. Yes, to West Bengal would decrease. Now, what many people try to explain to the representatives from West Bengal was that there is a very big difference between availability of water and supply of water. So your river has a certain amount of water. You don't supply all of that to use. You only supply a part of it. So your availability of water remains constant. If you supplied all the water that was available this year, there'd be nothing left next year. So, and this is something that I cannot comment as to why they refused to understand. Whether they understood and just didn't want to understand, that is, I cannot say the thinking behind the representatives from West Bengal. But it came down to this. There were also a lot of political issues in play back in 2011.
The actual utilization of water from this river so far, and even in terms of the development plans, how much optimally they could take from that. No, and some such calculation must have been given.
Yes. No, we did a lot of calculation. I know this because I was one of the people, along with a number of other people working on this. There was, beyond a point, there was minimal objection from Sikkim. There was, the agreement looked at it the best way it could to benefit development along the entire river. So from India and from Bangladesh.
What were Sikkim's objections?
Sikkim's, some of their objections were based on, I wouldn't say objections, they were more concerns because there was going to be a number of development plans, especially for hydroelectricity, and some of their concerns were from an ecological and environmental perspective, but they were addressed. I think beyond a point they were fine. But the fact of the matter is, also in 2011, there was a lot of politics between the center and West Bengal. And ultimately that's what it came down to. There was hope in 2015 that some of this politics might change. It has not. It is now 2019 and the politics haven't changed at all still. But given the changes within West Bengal right now, if there is a change in government there, then maybe this agreement will be signed.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, but
So,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, firstly, correct me if I'm wrong, the Sanko, when it comes to India, it comes in as the Lohit. Is that right?
Into Arunachal.
So, is that for the Lohit?
Yes, there's the Lohit and then there's also the Subansiri
Okay.
river. So that two, but the main one is right when it
So,
turns, it's the Lohit.
And considering, I think, the Bang and the bunch of other tributaries over there as well.
Yeah.
The Sanko itself, like right before it enters India, how significant is its volume? Like the volume of water, and as a result, taking from that, like how significant would the effect be? What you mentioned earlier, that it's the effect India would face if there was diversion would not be as significant as everyone makes it out to be. So, what would be the exact effects of a diversion?
So here's the Sanko, Lhasa, and here's the bend,
Yeah.
and this is India. This is India, Arunachal. Everybody's heard of the Three Gorges Dam.
Yeah.
Right, that's here at the bend. The diversion plans that China has, the SNDWP, the South Diversion Project. It's not actually from here. It's from many parts over here. So that's something to keep in mind. Secondly, the precipitation of
No, you said three gorges there.
Simple changes.
No, three gorges is much down. That is the second for not at all.
That's in United States.
yes, I'm sorry. There's a whole other set of dams that they are building at the bend over there.
No,
Yes.
in the bend
At the bend. Yes.
or before the bend.
Well, it's at the bend because
But at the bend, the fall is so big.
yes.
I don't think anybody can.
No, you
Yeah.
can't. Which is why the scientists in China themselves have said this is a kind of a ridiculous idea. So it's still an idea. It's not gone anywhere.
they built something.
They built.
Utilization they've done that.
They've done that. Yeah.
Didn't disclose to them. We found out.
You can ask some of the scientists in China will tell you this also. But see, the point is,
We were talking about
Yeah. the water of the Brahmaputra starts here, goes all the way here, right? Only and now, because water is a closely guarded secret everywhere, both in India and in China, it's hard to give an exact number. But based on a lot of research, conversation with our scientific community in India, as much as information I've been able to get from China, I can't say this is a definite number, but this is based on calculation and somewhat of a guesstimate that about 15% of the Brahmaputra is in China, and the rest in India and then in Bangladesh.
You said 1.5.
1.5, only 1.5.
But I think
It's a pretty small number.
the as per the BG what is quoted the government sources, and he says 70%, only 30% is coming from the after the grade.
After, yes.
And the 70% may be added, but even that is not scientifically.
No, it's not, and so I'm sure 100% that China has done its research. It knows actually what's happening over there, but only they know it.
But I think at least that part is you leave it to China, but we can calculate.
We can calculate
how much is added in India.
Yes.
And if we have the accurate figures, then we can work on that.
And this is where it comes down to the fact that right in the beginning I said that there is, because of mismanagement and lack of research, lack of information, even India has no idea beyond a point as to how much water. But years of people's work, research and all, we can tell you that 70%, like they say, now whether it's 70% during monsoon period or lean period is a little bit uncertain, but most scientific community will agree on this number, because now this is what we are all using. What this means then, to answer your question, is that even if China were to go through with all of its plans from the Yarlung Tsango, which will take many years, because their concentrated plans are right now in the central and northern region, because Beijing has no water, and you can't have a capital with no water. A lot of their economic development in high economic zones are in that part. So that's the place where they are concentrating. But let's assume they start work on this tomorrow and they divert all of the water. Because of the high levels of precipitation in Arunachal, Assam, and then further down in Bangladesh, the absolute flow of this river is unlikely to be affected to a great extent. Not that it won't be affected. Also, we have then the Subansiri river, which is also in Arunachal, is one of the biggest tributaries that feeds water into the Brahmaputra. That is not under development in China. It is, however, under development in India. So, the development on that tributary changes how much water quality and quantity flows into the Brahmaputra from an Indian side itself, which is something we need to take into consideration when we look at how the Brahmaputra might be affected. Then we have many rivers that come from Bhutan. There are some development plans of these tributaries as well in Bhutan, but these are plans that India is doing with Bhutan, mostly for hydroelectricity purposes. So all of this has to be taken into consideration when you look at the river, the flow. It's not then just about flow. You might have enough quantity of water, but based on your development, your dam building, your hydroelectricity projects, diversion, it changes the quality of the water. Which, if you have bad quality water, you might have a lot of it, but it's unusable, except for in certain cases by industrial use. So, and that answers your question in that sense. You know, it's not just one part of it. And then I come back to what I said right at the beginning, how interconnected everything is. So you can't look at just one isolated event. You have to see what's happening along the entire river to say that yes, this river is going to be affected.
I just have another question I can ask that. Could you elaborate a little on the policies that you mentioned that China instituted after 2011, the policies you said were good and
yes.
actually worked well or succeeded?
I have a list of it over here, but I have to say, like I said, I'm writing a paper on this, which is very exciting. Look at what China has been doing, and so one of the things that they did, and that was right in the offset, was to streamline their bureaucracy, which we're now doing with our Jal Shakti ministry. So, and I also learned earlier today from Rajesh that they were streamlining their bureaucracy on other subjects as well. So it seems to be something that they thought of back then. They set up something called river chiefs. And these are people in municipalities across the country that were equipped with the ability to make decisions faster. They are almost, all of them are either engineers or scientists or water environment academics, but they were then given training on other subjects such as how to manage a river, how to manage people. So this is whole set of, they're not bureaucrats because they are not within the government, but they are appointees, I guess, these river chiefs. And these river chiefs are given a certain amount of autonomy and power, and they are given direct access to the people who make decisions and power. So,
State level, central level.
at the central level over here. In China, it's at the central level. So you have a lot more. So if you look at what's happened since 2011, well, the river chiefs were set up a few years after the 12th five-year plan. But if you can look at the last, say, about 3 years or so, decision making on something like this has been much faster, because information and access has been created. So you can do anything from, if you see somebody polluting the river, you can go to your river chief, tell them, and they have the access to be able to tell the authorities who need to do something, and so stuff happens much faster. Now, river chiefs is a system that they created that works for them, and conceptually I think it's quite an interesting concept to see how we can maybe think about adapting that over here in some fashion. Then, I mean, there's a number of them.
We did that for Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. We did that for Swachh Bharat Abhiyan.
Yes, we did that for the Swachh Bharat, and I think it's a great concept that we can then put for the Jal Shakti also.
Decentralization and centralization.
Sorry. So question at the back. Then.
On that point, to what extent are Arunachal Pradesh's and Assam's and New Delhi's interests aligned in regards to Brahmaputra management? And is there a mechanism for kind of aligning those interests?
This is being recorded.
We could
Then,
pause it if you like.
We could
We'll take it off.
Arunachal, Assam and New Delhi.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. One question, having worked on transboundary water issues for a long time myself and more closely now looking at domestic water politics in the country, you said very rightly that there's a focus with the creation of Jal Shakti about trying to streamline the bureaucracy, bringing drinking water, sanitation together with Ministry of Water itself. But you still see a very, even if you look at the way in which the mission has been designed, Jal Shakti, it's a very supply side driven, intensive, it's focused on infrastructure intensive solutions, dams, river basin transfers, impact zones, right?
Yes.
And I was actually at CPR just a few days ago where we had someone from the Central Water Commission talking about this new data tool that they've come up with. And they talked about specifically Ganga and Brahmaputra as being the two rivers which have received the maximum flow, but which also where the maximum amount of water goes out into the ocean, right? And so the mentality within the technocracy is still very one of, let's conserve the water, let's keep it within the country, right? In a framework which is so technocratic, supply side focused, and as you said, it sounds very similar to what China must have gone through as well, but the focus is on the solution is interbasin transfers and let's keep the water within the country. Where do you think really is the scope for building a consensus within the technocracy about saying, well, we need to think about our lower riparian states? In a complex basin like the Brahmaputra, for example, where you also have sovereignty issues, boundary issues, geopolitics, right? Because on an issue like transboundary water, you need to figure out, it's not a zero-sum game, right? It has to be a win-win, what are the tradable benefits? So, drawing on your experience in other countries, Senegal, for example, I don't know if it's comfortable or not, what would you say is, where do we need to shift the discussion?
So I don't know, I know I have this written in my notes, but I must have forgotten, but you're absolutely right. India thinks of water from a supply perspective. It's all over the country on this. Where we can shift, if I came up with that idea, I'd be super famous and would have solved all our problems, but I'm working on it. The thing is, within India, there is still, till that mentality shifts from supply to equitable use, nothing will change. But because we are now thinking of water with the new ministry, with the streamlining of the new ministry, we're thinking of water not just as water to give, but water also a little bit part of our environment, food security, health security. I think that you can see a start in the change in the thinking a little. I mean, we've never thought of water in terms of health security before this on a central level, on a nationwide level, but we are now doing that. So that itself indicates a slight new perspective. I can't say it's a shift, but like new ideas are coming in. China actually does not think of water as only from the supply side, and it thinks of water in terms of its development. So if I need to supply water for agricultural use, yes. But if I need to keep my water for energy, then yes. So they look at it depending on what their requirements are. We still haven't gotten there yet, and I think that's kind of the place we need to get to. If we look at the Indus water treaty, right, it's an equal distribution of water. It's not equitable, it's equal. It's a divorce agreement. You have 3 rivers, I have 3 rivers, you know. You manage your kids, I'll manage my kids, and that's it. There's no meeting ground over here. And that's the thinking that we've had up till now. But the fact that in the last couple of years, we have had more conversation and dialogue with Nepal and Bhutan on how to manage our water with Nepal and Bhutan, not just for supply, but for other uses, then gives one thought that perhaps this new perspective will catch on. I think now the states will also, like I said, I think Arunachal is a good place to come on board. There is hope that Assam and one day West Bengal will come on board. I think if the states give it a lot more push, then the center will have no choice but to change. To stop thinking of water from a supply perspective. You have to think of water in a more holistic perspective. You can't only think of water as, okay, I have to supply it, like she said, for urban use, for agricultural use, for industrial use. Then you're going to have very little damage for the future.
Okay.
Yes.
My question is the water that straight land is showing on the Yarlung Sangpo, is it all glacial fed? And should we assume that everything this side of the line in India is monsoon fed? And if so, the first question is that. And the second is, how would climate change affect this, given that Tibet is heating at about twice as much as the rest of the plains as we understand?
Right. So the first question is, yes, most of it in Yarlung, Tsangpo is glacially fed. This is the Tibetan high plateau, which is the headwaters for the Brahmaputra, the Ganga, and at the complete western end for the Indus as well. In India, some of the tributaries are also fed by glaciers and the mountains. So if you look at the Subansiri, for example, in Nepal as well, it's fed by glaciers. Though if you only look at the Brahmaputra, a considerable amount, and again now people differ on numbers, but you can say about 60 to 65% is all precipitation. So monsoon in India and monsoon in Bangladesh. So when it comes to climate change, I don't think anybody has an answer to that question because nobody has done the research on that. We do have some dialogue with China on research purposes for climate risks and earthquakes in this region, which one of the suggestions has been to sort of take that earthquake agreement to include glacial research as well. But that would then mean China giving access of the Tibetan high plateau to other countries, forget even India, maybe other neutral countries, to be able to do some research on the glaciers. What is the rate of change? What is the rate of shift? So that we can then do some prediction and create models for how this will affect all these rivers, right? The Brahmaputra and its tributaries, the Ganga, as well as the Indus, because all the headwaters are coming from the Tibetan highland. But I have no doubt there is some work already that China has done, but beyond the point, we have to ask the Chinese for that.
is also reporting this.
Yes, yes. There are a lot of international reports. We don't know beyond the point, and even the UN will tell you their climate change departments. It's all just based on estimate, based on temperature increase, altitude, and the rate of glacial change in other parts of the world.
Also the
Yes.
the India-China MOU is not covering this aspect.
No.
It is only sharing of the river.
Yeah, data. They are supposed to provide us with data. But we have another MOU on earthquake management, which is very separate. But we look at earthquake management in this region because this is a very earthquake-prone region, and there have been, like I said, suggestions to maybe expand that earthquake-related MOU to other areas.
Just
Tisha,
one
can
point.
I-
Hold on.
can I ask another-
There is something who haven't come in yet.
Thank you for a very informative talk, Ambika. I wanted to check on 2 points from you. One is that you had mentioned about the 1960 Indus Water Treaty, and you also mentioned about the 1977 treaty. What was the reason why we didn't sign India? What were the challenges or concerns which we saw that we didn't sign it? Because you mentioned there are 4 countries which didn't sign, and India was one of them.
The
United
UN,
Nations Water Courses Convention.
because it's the same reason why China didn't sign it. And it's because we looked at water as a security subject. And we consider us as an upper riparian, but it's really because water is a security subject. So, I'll give you a different example. Turkey, right? For them, water has always been a portfolio of, till recently, the Prime Minister's office, not a portfolio of water ministers. I mean, transboundary water, not internal domestic water. Which then tells you how Turkey thinks of water, because it's under the PMO over there and the Foreign Ministry. Now, of course, the Prime Minister and the President have exchanged roles and all of that, so there is some changes in how Turkey is looking at its water because of their... So this is how India has also thought of water, right? It's very much a closely guarded, secret issue. Because we are now, it's slowly changing. So, but I don't think we will ever sign the 1977 UN...
77.
Sorry, my dates are
1977.
77.
77, yes. The Water Courses Convention, the UN Water Courses Convention. So what was the other part of your about the Indus? Yeah. I mean, the Indus, it's a pretty clear treaty over
So
there.
that's why the point is we signed it in 1950, and 77 probably China was nowhere in the radar. So yet we had so many
We
issues
weren't thinking of it as
concerns.
China, we were thinking of it as water to Bangladesh, Nepal, Tibet.
I think he's talking about the end.
Indus.
He's talking about the end.
No.
I was trying to relate the Indus because we signed it that time.
Yes, that's right. It's the same.
Indus is-
Yeah.
Somebody else will.
There was
No.
somebody at the back, no?
Yeah.
No?
Yes, Alan.
Ambika, my point was about your experiences in other, working in other, or your experiences in West Africa and even Middle East, about transnational cooperation. How much positive are you about India, China in this? I mean, also Bangladesh, because the basic infrastructure I mean, given the geopolitics and the sensitivities associated with it in the long term, and also from your own experiences, I mean, are you able to find like-minded organizations or networks or agencies in both India and China to sort of work on this, or are we? Do you see? I mean, can you be more optimistic or?
I am always optimistic. I worked for more than 10 years in the Middle East and I'm still optimistic. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I feel like it's required. When it comes to India, I mean, I sort of answered this, I think, already in my presentation, but I'm more hopeful for India and Bangladesh to come together. In fact, I think it's important that India and Bangladesh come together. Bring Nepal and Bhutan into the fold, and then come to China with a more united front that will work. It will probably have a lot more success than if India tried to go it alone with China, or if Bangladesh tried to go it alone with China. There is some strength in numbers, to put it very simply. But that's what happened with the Mekong. We have an example right here, right? The Thailand, Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, they said, okay, well, China is not going to come together. They created the MRC, the Mekong River Commission, where they work on a lot of number of issues that don't need to involve China, including really great data management systems. I mean, their numbers over there are up to date. And I've traveled around a lot of the Mekong River. I've seen some of their measurement stations. All the 4 countries, they don't look at water as a secret issue. They look at it as a, let's have everybody have the up-to-date information so we can work together to mitigate whatever might come our way. And eventually, about 3 or 4 years ago, China started a more sustained dialogue with the MRC. Not with the countries individually, but with the MRC. So that tells you something about how China thinks also, and how it may or may not move in the future. Does that?
Thank you. First of all, we talked about the ecological balance. There is, of course, the Bay of Bengal, something called a dead ecological zone.
Yes.
Which actually has a potential of actually causing a system, ecological system, destabilization, not only the Bay of Bengal, but even globally. So I think that's something which it seems that practically people are given up. It's just a question of faith, how actually what happens. The other point you actually made, you said that you had discussions in China, and you said that our concerns are not as much as we like to think. So I presume they must have told you some concrete figures in terms of data as to what they plan to do in terms of diversion of water from the sun pole. It's not really affecting it, and how convincing those figures? No, that's one question.
No, this is public knowledge.
No, but you said your discussions with them suggested to you based on technical discussions.
No, my discussions with them and my knowledge of and research, I would say all of it together.
I'm talking about what your discussions were with them. Let's put it like that. And how you're reassured by their discussion?
No, I wouldn't say I'm reassured by their discussions. I'm not even reassured. I'm just saying, based on all of these factors.
No, okay, I get your point. Now, second thing, you said about Mekong cooperation system, and you said that's an example for us to follow. I think China's behavior has been actually quite atrocious there. It's not, I mean, they were writing roughshod over the other right wing, and actually in violation of all the understanding agreement that they have. And in fact, I'm glad that they themselves decided that they can do a better job to get China on board.
Correct.
So it showed an attitude. It is not that something
because of us or something that is happening between us bilaterally, that we have an issue. I think the Chinese use all the, let's say, infrastructure as such, as an instrument to compel diplomacy. Let's not forget that.
I agree.
I just want to complete that.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I also heard, and you must correct me on that, and that's just what I heard from people who also tell that actually the Chinese created a parallel system of Mekong management with inviting the lower riparians to come and join on their terms.
Yeah, the Langkang agreement.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So it shows that obviously things are not quite as smooth as they are made out to be.
No, if I gave an impression that it's smooth, then I apologize. See, you're right. China ran roughshod over the lower Mekong countries. But the learning there is that despite China, the kind of cooperation that exists between those four lower Mekong countries is very commendable. And that's what I was trying to get at.
I just want to get a little bit more.
But then, if you look at China's shift in attitude from the 50s and the 60s to now with the lower Mekong countries, is what I wanted to highlight. It has, when it comes to how it has only because of China's requirements with the Yunnan province. And transportation over there is very important to the Yunnan province because that's how their economic.
I just want to do a little bit more.
Okay.
On water diversion, this thing on Sampo. Because as I mentioned that it's our satellite who found out they actually had prism structures.
Yes.
Which they denied at that time to us.
Yeah.
So the point actually is when you expect reassurance from their side, you have to take them with a little bit of understanding really what is the state of play in the two countries.
Yes.
That's one thing. The other thing, of course, is that you're right because even the sheer engineering feat of diverting so much of water to actually alleviate their water thirst in those massively popular area, it actually with a pipe dream.
Yes, and many Chinese
pipe dream.
yes, many of the Chinese scientists have started to tell you.
In fact, one has read a little bit, though I'm not a China expert, a China man, that even the Three Gorges Dam, there are a lot of criticism internally that it was wrongly to do. I mean, Chinese think in those kind of mega terms, and therefore for them it's something to show their feet and so on and so forth. The last point actually is that a new idea that us South Asian or sub-Brahman cooperation case is a great idea. And I think if we can work on that apart from what China will do or not do, I think that's something which actually needs to be done. And maybe some more concrete suggestions from talk. In fact, I was reading this particular thing that you mentioned about the alliance that we're talking about. It's a great idea because you don't blame everything on China, but the fact of the matter is that the problem that we have are such that only we can solve.
Yes, and so there are many things we can do without involving China, but we haven't actually done any of those either.
Well said.
So you had something,
Yeah.
sorry.
Just a final point,
You
because we need to.
talked about Nepal, but from a different point of view. My question about Nepal is that every year there is flooding in Bihar.
Yes.
Every year from Nepal side. I mean, this is well established that waters come from Nepal and there is flooding in Bihar. And every year perhaps this problem is becoming more and more. What do you suggest could be done to alleviate this problem to some extent, the problem of flooding in Bihar from Nepal side?
So, last year when I travelled in Bihar, some of the rivers to the Nepal border. There are several factors. One is that, I hate to say this, but some of the development along these rivers, it's extremely high, and similar to Assam, similar to Kerala, Bombay, development is causing the problem to become even more worse. Right now, flooding is natural. One of the things that we could do, which
You mean the rivers are...
the rivers are overstressed. They're overdeveloped.
And there is so much
Yeah.
population on the
Yes.
side.
Yes, yes, and I've seen this. I mean, when I was in Bihar, I traveled up the rivers to the border, and I've seen it. You see it in Uttarakhand also. I've seen it in Kerala. I mean, I live in Bombay. Deforestation, natural floodplains are being destroyed. But this is not, yes, then we come down to the sand mafia and all of that. But this is not the only reason. I mean, floods do happen, and it is possible to, you can't avoid them, but you can try and mitigate them.
Yes.
And there are some very excellent projects that have been put into place in certain areas, in like Peru, for example, and in Argentina, to try and manage floods that are caused by mountain areas, which are very different from floods caused in flat plain areas. And I think if we study some of these things that have been put into place around the world and see how we can then use it over here, as countries together, like India and Nepal, to work together on something like this, see what other countries have done and how can we do this here. I think that'd be really useful for us. We haven't done something like that up till date, but there is some advantage to seeing positive examples.
Are you optimistic about this aspect?
This would be very easy to do. I mean, India and Nepal to work together on flooding them and us. It should be very easy, right? It's not a contentious issue. It should be easy.